to our season finale in our 6 and 60 series. Lovely to have you all here. If you don't already know, 6 and 60 is brought to you by the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme. The programme is funded by the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and delivered by UKOI. And the programme itself has funded more than 50 projects across the UK, accelerating innovative approaches to smart local energy systems. And we'll get to hear from a few of those today. And the purpose of the series really is to bring together 6 experts for 60 minutes to explore a core theme on our journey to net zero. So far in the series, we've covered finance and investment, data and digitalisation, and technology and infrastructure. And for our final event, we'll be talking about people and skills. And we have a brilliant expert panel joining us today to help us do that. They'll be sharing their insights on where we should be focusing as we consider what's required in terms of the capability and skills we need to achieve net zero. And understanding this is key to unlocking what we think is a massive opportunity, not only to achieve net zero, but also to deliver huge benefits to local economies and communities across the UK. So since our last 6 and 60, we know this because we published our Accelerating Net Zero report, which you might have seen. This shows that taking a local place-based approach to net zero alongside national action could save what we think is around £130 billion worth of savings in investment costs, and could deliver an additional £430 billion in benefits by tailoring local net zero interventions to complement action at a national level. So a big opportunity and one that we can't afford to miss. So to make sure we capitalise on that opportunity, it's really critical that we understand the skills and capabilities that we need in place. And I'm really looking forward to exploring that more today. So you can see here a quick overview of the agenda that we'll be covering. So we have 6 expert speakers with us and also time for a Q&A session at the end. So please do drop your questions in the chat for us to pick up with the panel later. But let's kick off with our first speaker, Rosanna Chitchin. So Rosanna is Senior Researcher at University of Bristol and Energy Rev Lead for the National Skills Needs Assessment. Just yesterday published a very timely report which considers the skills and measures that we need to support smart local energy systems. So really good to be having this conversation today. So I will hand over to you, Rosanna.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So I will be talking today about the skills for transitioning to a clean energy system. And to give a bit of a context to this work, so why energy? Well, because energy is a driver of economic activity across everything really that we do. And without a net zero energy system, no sector or activity will be able to be truly net zero. So then what skills do we need and what challenges do we face in transitioning to a net zero energy sector? So to answer this question, within the Energy Rev Consortium, we started by looking at 3 case studies. The first one was a case study of Bristol as a city with over 10 years experience of undertaking various energy transition projects. And then the 2 large-scale demonstrators that are carried out as part of Energy Revolution, the one which is run by Oxford on Energy Superhub, and the one at the Isle of Orkney on called Reflex project. And so the findings from these 3 very different case studies are discussed here. And the interesting point here to note is that actually, although the case studies are quite different, the findings are quite consistent across them. So then, what did we learn about the energy transition skills? So when we started these case studies, we were expecting to learn about energy sector. But soon we discovered that actually energy transition is not about just transition of energy sector, but it's also about transition in transport and mobility because, well, all the transport is being currently electrified or used alternative fuels. It's also about building and retrofit and constructions where a lot of the energy is used for home heating and business services. It's also about local and national government where the energy transition is supported or prevented by the measures that they take. And lastly, it's about citizens and groups of citizens because this energy transition needs to come to their homes. to the change of their behaviors, to their houses, where they buy new types of equipment, or they are buying new electric cars. So people need to be engaged. And so the skills for transition to a clean energy system require skills within each of those sectors that I mentioned, but also there is a set of skills that brings things across the sectors and interconnects them and makes them into a system, an energy system. So we can talk a lot about each of those sectors, and there is a lot that we have discussed in a specific case study reports, which are referenced at the end of this presentation. Please have a look if you want to learn about individual sector skills. But I will talk a little bit more here about the cross-sectoral skills, the 4 things that are, cross-cutting all the sectors that I mentioned and are relevant in each of those sectors to be able to pull them together and to enable the system-wide transition. So the first set of skills in here is related to energy networks integration. And what we need to think and remember in here is that in order for us to enable transition, all the new types of equipment, all the new solutions need to be integrated with existing energy transmission and distribution systems. So we are then needing a number of integration and installation skills. And we are short of them because a lot of those technologies are new and they need to be developed. Like even things like installing smart meters is a challenge because we don't have enough people qualified to do that, right? But the other thing here is to think about the vision. So each of those sectors has their own perspectives and their own goals, but actually energy transition needs to be one of the key recognized goals across all these sectors. And it is a challenge and a recommendation that without having this common goal of having clean energy sector by all participants, achieving this kind of energy sector will be quite impossible. The second set of skills is that related to ICT and skills like software engineering, data analytics, networking and connectivity. These are the things which are necessary in order to integrate these parts of these systems. So I wanted to say in here that citizens need to be upskilled across all, general people, all people need to be upskilled in terms of understanding renewable technologies and their use, understanding the benefits and costs of using these technologies, understanding the privacy and security implications of their data sharing. And so these are the things which are necessary for them to be able to engage into the energy transition. And so these are the skills that we suggest need to be taught from schools onwards, because that will give a chance for people to get used to the technologies and to be able to look forward to using these technologies in their daily lives. So finally, I wanted to conclude by giving some overall perspectives on the characteristics of green jobs in energy that we observe. So we observe the trends of green jobs in energy becoming much more skilled. And this is a transition across all aspects. And for example, if you are a gas boiler installer, now you also need to be able how to install heat pumps. So you need to know and brush up on your electrical skills as well. The second aspect is of these jobs becoming much more digitized. And this is because in every subsector of energy system, data needs to be collected and data needs to be shared and optimized within and across the system. So perspective of what we found from our work, and if you are interested in finding a bit more, please feel free to look at the references here, as well as get in touch with any questions. Thank you very much. Back to you, Sophie.
brilliant overview of where we're at in terms of our understanding of skills required for smart local energy systems. On to our next speaker, we have Akos Rivers from London South Bank University and is a lead partner on our Prospering from the Energy Revolution's Green Skies project. He's going to be talking about the work that the project is doing in developing a smart local energy system centre of excellence. So over to you, Akos.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you very much, Sophie, for the introduction and also for the invitation. It's great to be here. So today I would like to very briefly introduce Green Skies, the project itself, and also the brand new Centre of Excellence in Smart Local Energy Systems. So Green Skies is a detailed design project funded by Innovate UK for a smart local energy system that aims to reduce carbon emissions and also tackle fuel poverty across the London Borough of Islington. The technical concept of the scheme is actually illustrated on this infographic on the left-hand side of this slide. Fundamental to the scheme is actually a district heating and cooling network, which recovers and then distributes waste heat that's been captured from a local data center to users, including social housing estates, and also some commercial buildings too. So we have an absolutely brilliant but fairly large consortium, including 15 partners with a diverse range of expertise across the energy and the built environment sectors. So this scheme in Islington now has been our focus project for the last 2 years, and this will now soon be transitioning to its construction phase, which we, of course, we're extremely happy about. However, for day one on this project, we've been carefully capturing the learnings from the design process and been developing novel tools and approaches that can ultimately help us to support replication elsewhere across the UK. So moving on to the next slide, clearly replication of large schemes, energy schemes to meet our emissions targets. The Green Sky scheme has now been acknowledged and incorporated into Islington's net zero strategy. Recording. And our consortium is continue supporting the council on their net zero journey. However, we all know that not only Islington, who declared climate emergency since 2018, more than 3/4 of all local authorities across the UK joined the movement, and more than half of those authorities actually set a goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2030 or even sooner. So based on experience talking to representatives from these local authorities across the UK, actually a few are clear on actually how to actually meet that challenge and make the transition happen. So this is actually one big challenge that we think that we need to overcome. The other very significant challenge that we need to tackle is that the entire low carbon energy industry is facing a large and persistent skills gap and shortages, as Susanna also highlighted in her presentation. So this includes, of course, well-known shortages in technical skills. Susanna also mentioned skills in installing heat pumps or heat pump installers, but of course, boosting the workforce in other areas like customer engagement, project management, urban planning, are going to be also very important or equally important. So considering these major challenges, our consortium with the support of Innovate UK started working on the establishment of a new Centre of Excellence in smart local energy systems. This new centre is led by LSBU and working with a network of consultancy and educational associates. So currently most of our associates are from the Green Skies consortium, who are either individual experts or organizations expressed their interest to take part in the centre's activities. Ultimately, our mission is to accelerate the development and the rollout of Green Skies like smart local energy systems across the UK. And by doing that, we are hoping that we can actually support the creation of more sustainable and healthier built environments, which are actually co-created by local communities, and so those communities actually can thrive. The next slide actually shows our initial value propositions, highlighting actually two key service trends that we imagine for the centre. So one is being the provision of consultancy. As I mentioned before, we do see local authorities as our anchor customers and supporting them on their net zero journey, for example, through strategic decision making. We see that a great potential there. In addition to that, the centre also provides services in areas of training and education. So the subjects that we would like to cover and can provide both consultancy as well as short courses are covering both technical and non-technical aspects of smart energy system design, operation, and deployment. So this could include, for example, opportunity mapping for heat networks, detailed feasibility studies, co-design best practices, as well as community and stakeholder engagement. But also, there are a few things here which relates to, exploring funding opportunities, investment, ownership options as well. So we are planning to cover, a fairly broad range of topics and subjects within, the centre and its activities. So we are at the start of a really long journey, but ultimately our centre is aspiring to be nationally and of course eventually internationally recognised as a go-to place for advice where community-focused integrated local energy systems are actually being considered. We also like to be recognised as a credible training body. So we are aiming to accredit many of our planned short courses, and we are currently going through a process of establishing different ways of actually doing that. And finally, we also like the centre to provide a platform of resources and a community of shared values. So we have plans to organise networking events with peer-to-peer learning opportunities, webinars, conferences, ultimately really to stimulate, with the aim to stimulate the knowledge exchange and collaboration opportunities within this field. So overall, this is a very exciting time for us. We have a pretty long to-do list for the centre for the next few months. With my commercial colleagues, we are currently working out our long-term business plan for the centre, alongside with our operational strategy and our detailed value proposition too. So we're also currently working on developing the short course portfolio, which I mentioned about, and each of our courses will be available on our brand new user-friendly short course platform, which has been developed by my colleagues at LSBU. So also thanks to Innovate UK, we are now working on 5 new very exciting feasibility studies, which will really help building the centre's consultancy projects portfolio ultimately. So we are really grateful to Innovate UK for that support. And also we are really actively engaging with organisations with this complementary interest to the centre to identify opportunities for both short and long-term collaborations in areas both consultancy as well as training and educational opportunities. And finally, we also started planning for our launching event, which will likely to be held around September at one of our LSBU campuses. So yeah, lots going on for us. Please keep an eye on our activities through our social media channels. And if you have any questions, yeah, please do get in touch. I'm going to have my email on the final slide. We really like to discuss, collaboration opportunities with all of you. So thank you very much for listening. And I think this is the time I hand back to Sophie. Thank you.
Really exciting stuff, and really looking forward to seeing the Centre of Excellence grow and help to develop that pipeline of projects that we know we need. So next up, we have Chris Oldham, Senior Policy and Programme Manager at the City of London Corporation. He's here to tell us more about the Skills for a Sustainable Skyline Task Force.
Thanks, Sophie. Good morning, everybody. So for those that don't know, the City Corporation Authority in Square Mile, we also act as a lobbying organisation on behalf of London's financial and professional services sector to maintain a globally competitive London and on a globally competitive Britain. So we've done some research recently on a key risk to our office blocks in central London, and we found that there's a real skills gap relevant to Arcos's point across the built environment sector, across the full project lifecycle. We found that, I'll just skip to the next slide. As I hope you'll see in a second, you'll see that a third of construction jobs are deemed as hard to fill. The built environment sector is not really seen as an attractive proposition to young people particularly. We've got a skills challenge that's expected to grow in coming years in line with greater demand for modern methods of construction and more green buildings, sustainable buildings. And this is a real barrier for across London boroughs, our net zero ambitions be net zero by, depending on GLA, by 2030, by 2040 for the City Corporation's own climate action goals. Put simply, if we cannot get the skilled workers we need to decarbonise our built environment, I can't see a way that we're going to hit those net zero ambitions. It's pretty big stuff. We've done some research and found that there's quite a lot of activity and insight around the domestic built environment sector and the skills that we'll need to retrofit and decarbonise those buildings. Where we've seen a gap in activity is around commercial buildings, office blocks predominantly, across central London, and the skills that we'll need, that the skilled workers will need to decarbonise those buildings. You can see in the orange box, I hope on the screen there, that we've done some research with built environment professionals. We found, for example, that 94% of the sector said the sector lacks the skilled workers it needs to achieve our net zero targets. Again, 87% said there's a lack of workforce diversity, crucially, and 75% would agree that there's a growing green skills gap. So what we're proposing is City Corporation using our convening power to bring together industry bodies, employers, training providers, government, both national and local, all together to make sure we've got the skilled workers that we need. And we're looking at central London as defined by the Central London Forwards Regional Partnership boroughs, 12 boroughs, where there's a high concentration of office blocks that will need to be decarbonised. I'll run to the next slide. So I'm hoping you can see a little pyramid on the screen. Regarding the outcomes for our task force, we're going to have 3 work streams. The first will be to create a comprehensive evidence base on skills and training gaps, to look at the business case for investing in skills, to look at the planning pipeline for future commercial buildings and the skills needed for those, and the barriers to action for bridging those skills gaps that we've identified. The second work stream will be responding to that evidence base, and the third work stream will be a comprehensive workforce engagement campaign designed to encourage existing built environment workers to and to attract a large cohort of new people into the built environment, particularly underrepresented demographics. All of this will support our aim to ensure the built environment has access to skilled work needs across a full project life cycle to build, design, operate commercial buildings in central London boroughs, which are sustainable, to ensure that. Next slide. So I'm hoping that you can see our structure. In terms of where we are now, we've, as you can see, the 3 work streams are 2023. This year we're doing evidence-based work, and next year we'll deliver both the response evidence and the industry engagement campaign in 2023. We've now actually completed our task force, and many others. We have a steering board of senior leaders to define the outputs of the task force. We've got 51 associate steering board, and crucially, we're currently for commercial. I'll put my gas will be 10 days for a any return you're working with very senior level organization and showcasing your own support necessary and so happy to have some one-to-one offline about that. And then finally, bring you on to my details. Thank you for your time, and please do important piece of work. By joining the task force, working group member, or by raising awareness, by work by social gather the evidence and then respond to it. Commercial building.
Thanks for that, Chris. Sorry, I think there might have been some sound quality issues there, but hopefully we got the gist. Brilliant, great to hear about the work that the task force is doing, and that there's opportunities to work together to do more. So next up, we have Richard Bubb from Social Housing Action Plan, who is also leading on our Zero Carbon Rugeley project. He'll be talking to us about the work that they're doing to develop a retrofit pathway in Rugeley. Over to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Hello, everyone. I work for SHAP, Sustainable Housing Action Partnership. SHAP is a non-for-profit, member-led organisation working primarily in the West Midlands, but we also have a number of partnerships in the north of England as well. We're currently working on a number of projects to really look how to develop a retrofit pathway with all its complexity, working very closely with local authority partners, social housing providers, and the supply chain as well. So, you've just heard from Chris that the availability of skills is a problem. Also, the quality of skills is a real key issue for us. And we've seen many, many examples of how good quality skill delivery through retrofit can really fundamentally change properties. It hugely reduces energy bills and really cuts down the carbon emissions for that property. And people really like living in a well retrofitted home. We've also seen many, many examples of where retrofit doesn't work so well and poor quality installations are frequently promoted in media. And we're struggling a bit to understand why the retrofit sector isn't really regarded as a really attractive, high-skilled, high-paid career with entrants from school, university, and change of careers as well. At SHAP, we want to really show how retrofit is a really complex system and needs a systemic perspective to understand how to improve individual elements as well as the overall process. And we feel that actually a standalone skills development program may struggle to make a really big impact, as there are many other factors that need to be addressed at the same time to make retrofit attractive. So, for example, we've done a lot of work with two combined authorities to look at developing retrofit pathways, which included quite a lot of work with the supply chain to really understand their direct experience. And we hear very clearly that supply chain has very little incentive to invest in upskilling staff, taking on apprenticeships or adopting quality systems when retrofit contracts are short-term, often capital only, and often looking at relatively small numbers of measures. So because of that, colleges and training providers have little incentive in creating retrofit training programs. There is little demand. And also retrofit contracts that focus on just outputs primarily without creating a long-term pipeline really don't compel contractors to invest in skills beyond that short term. We heard an overwhelming message that supply chain will look after its own skills, will upskill, will take on apprenticeships, and all it needs for that is a long-term pipeline. So considering how other aspects affect the development of skills, we feel at SHAP and with our members and partners that are working on this, there are sort of 9 key aspects that really need to be addressed as a system if skills is going to be part of that process. So skills effects on a long-term pipeline. The skills and type of approach that we use really depends on, well, what are our zero carbon ambitions? Is it just EPCC, or are we going to a perspective of proper, really well, deeply retrofitted properties? The customer journey and the skills that apply to that are really, really critical if people are going to onboard and deliver retrofit programs properly. So we also want to see how these aspects actually reinforce or contradict each other, and actually how can we turn around the barriers that currently exist to understand how they need to be turned into an opportunity and really support the need for long-term diverse upskilling. So to do this, SHAP and our colleagues that we're working with, we're developing an evidence base for this that we will be put into BAYS and Department for Upskilling, leveling up very soon, and a couple of projects that we're talking about here. Sophie just mentioned SHAP is part of a large consortium delivering a SLES in Rugeley. And we're looking at real detail of how a SLES can be developed and what needs to be included in all aspects of that, and how do all the different work packages support or even contradict other activities. It's really important that things matter that sometimes you don't realise at the beginning. So Rugeley for 50 plus years has been very, very important in terms of a big power station and lots of coal. And that kept the lights on. And that was really important. That was something that the town felt very proud about. Now we're coming with a message that actually coal and power like that is very, very damaging to us. And we really need to understand how we bring on board residents on issues that really we might not have considered. And also SHAP's just worked with the LGA on a retrofit skills leadership program with local authorities. And one of the really overwhelming messages from that was just how the range of skills that local authority officers need and local authorities need to be able to deal with retrofit. And if we regard retrofit as a system, there are many aspects of that outside of the direct control of the local authorities. And actually, when we have short-term contracts being delivered, that actually puts local authorities in competition with each other to be able to get contractors at a reasonable price. So we'd be very keen to hear anybody else's views on understanding retrofit as a system and how to improve it. There's my email there. If you have any information you'd like to provide, I'd be very, very keen to take your views on board. And there's the web links of the 2 projects I just mentioned. So at that point, I'll hand back to Sophie.
Thanks, Richard. Really good to listen to talk through the issue of skills around retrofit. That's great. So we're going to continue along that theme with our next speaker, Russell Smith, who's Managing Director of Retrofit Works and Parity Projects, who will also be talking about skills gap and what's required to make sure that we can retrofit at scale. Russell, over to you. Thanks very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased to have followed Richard's talk because they work quite well together, what I'm about to say. I'm Managing Director of Parity Projects. We specialise in the deep retrofit of homes and providing information to people at the key decision-making points in the journey of a building. We currently advise over half of the social housing stock in the UK by having an online platform that allows people to understand the energy consumption. And we've now got 18 million UK homes in our platform. We hope to get the whole country in by the summer. That gives us a basis that I'll talk about shortly. The first thing I'm going to talk about very quickly is a national retrofit strategy that I worked on behalf of the Construction Leadership Council. How big is this problem, basically? What are we dealing with? And how do we talk about skills and the people involved in the journey on that basis? From a sort of national perspective, one of the key things here is that we need a strategy in order to pull together sort of various strands that currently aren't connected across our industry. A lot of people are waiting for each other to make the first move. And I think that's one of the things that echoes in Richard's talk just now. People are not necessarily wanting to take on apprentices because they can't necessarily see the long-term vision for where they ought to be going and whether they ought to be investing in themselves on that basis. And on that basis, if some of the regional governments that are doing this work, that are making good progress, are still fairly hamstrung on this. But I want to talk about sort of the key things that will make this work. And training and accreditation of people in the industry is one part of it. We identified a number of interlocking components that none of which you can leave out if you want to be successful in making this work. So I think that's the point I want to make with this really here is compliance, creating customer demand, getting people excited about all this stuff, aiming towards a particular standard. All of these things convene around how we ought to be training people to deliver a national retrofit program to try and reach net zero. These are all critical. And Green Deal, Green Home Grant Voucher in the UK, these are all things that have failed because they tried one or two of these things on the screen, not everything. The modelling we did using our platform was based on the fact that we want to get we've identified all measures in all homes in the UK and what would need to be done to get this moving. Our program was on an S-curve profile. In other words, we'd need time to get the people and skills sorted before we launch something exciting and for everybody to jump into, but also plan for them to do other things later. I think that's really important when we're dealing with people and skills, transferable skills, so people can do other things when the retrofit project is finished. But what are we talking about in terms of real numbers here? This graph here is showing on the left-hand side from 1997, a gradual growth in the RMI sector of the construction industry, a drop in 2008 based on the economic problems we had then. We've never really recovered, but just look at the scale of skills needed. Traditional skills here have been projected. Effectively, we need about 400,000 additional tradespeople in the UK to be able to hit net zero if we got these targets in mind. But it's not just about traditional skills. One thing we need to be thinking about quite carefully here is how we build up the trust within the customers so that they will go ahead and do this stuff. They have to invite us into the home. We've effectively got 20 million clients here that we need to convince to spend their own money on this stuff. And this, we need to be training people on advice. These are builders as well that need to be giving advice. They're often the first person that a householder will speak to. How do you support someone through a journey? How do you make sure that you're delivering customer service skills within each of these people as well to guide them through? Anyone that might have had some work in their own home recently might appreciate what I mean by that. But also, the impartiality of all this is one key thing. An impartial person that we would categorize as a retrofit coordinator, it's a qualification. We need 35,000 of them right now, and about 1,000 of them have gone through the Retrofit Academy, for instance, on delivering those. So we need to scale up critically, but a rounded bunch of people will be required to do this work in homes. The business case for the UK is pretty attractive. So this is a cumulative graph here. Let's look at the final row here. It's a £523 billion programme. This is an exciting opportunity for companies of all sizes to grab hold of this particular agenda and really get involved in it. We're only asking the government for a proportion of that. Private capital will come forward, but so if any politicians you're speaking to, or anybody that wants to think this is going to be tough, yes, it will be, but there's a massive opportunity, and every household benefits in the UK. So I'm going to give you an example of how we've managed to make that work on the ground. So in conjunction with Retrofit Works, which I founded 10 years ago, which is a not-for-profit cooperative, we do two things. The first one is we go out and win tenders, and we've recently just won the Mayor of London's £40 million retrofit programme to help fuel poor households in private homes across London. But we also take a punt, and we work with local organisations who can also be members of the Retrofit Works Co-op to convene and design local retrofit programmes. And Cosy Homes Oxfordshire is the first ever self-sustaining retrofit programme for able to pay customers in the UK. So it doesn't need any more external funding to run itself. It needed quite a bit to get off the ground, but the model allows to pay that working capital back over time. The basic premise of when we first start off is an energy model for every single dwelling in the county. We can look at every property from a marketing perspective. We can target people in the way they would wish to buy, but also householders could log on to a platform. And I invite people to go onto the website and have a play with that particular tool. You'd need to put in an Oxfordshire address in order to do that, however. But this is not just about giving householders advice. This is about giving contractors advice. I'll give you a very clear example here. One of the contractors that is actually in that photo with fantastic reputation locally. It wasn't just about getting them qualifications. They had those. They had never used a contract between themselves and a householder. They'd never written a method statement. They'd never used a risk assessment. We had to get all of that into them before we would be happy to recommend them to a householder. So these are really critical basics that our industry is not particularly good at. But then if we're giving a householder what we call a whole house plan, we need to be able to give that to a contractor too, because they need to be confident in the things that are strategically good for the householder. So my experience of doing this for about 20 years is that builders do tend to talk householders out of things they've never heard of. That is going to set us back a very long way. And of course, building regulations don't help in that respect either. A lot of progress to be made there. But we can give people here a phased plan to get to net zero. Ultimately, they'll know how to get there. And what things to do in which order. So qualifications wise, there are two key challenges here in my view. The existing workforce has got a lack of knowledge. I don't think that's a skills issue. It's knowledge, not skills in that particular sector. And when the new workforce that's coming through here, traditional skills, yes, but emerging techniques need to be recognised within the training centres that are doing this stuff as well. 3D scanning of houses, for instance, that can morph straight into a CAD drawing, that can go straight into a QS's pricing module, whatever it might be. These are things we all need to understand. And moreover, we need to create new companies. I'm going to leave this particular diagram on the screen here for people to see how we are looking to try and solve this. We think we will be able to, as a Retrofit Works, we'll be able to employ trainees to get over this particular issue that Richard highlighted in his previous presentation. These employers don't have a long enough outlook. Retrofit Works could, over a region, by bringing together fuel poverty programs and able to pay schemes. The EcoFurb scheme is pan-London. We've got a consistent throughput of customers now. We could take the risk and employ apprentices and act as an agency for our smaller companies that are members of our co-op to do that. But the yellow bits on the slide here, this is money. These are things that we need to resolve. We can link with training providers and people that can identify customers, but we need money to create new companies as well. That's what this is all about here. If we expect all the existing small companies in London to absorb new trainees, the volume required, and it's actually about 36,000 in London, they'll go bust. They can't grow quick enough in a sustainable fashion. So the key thing from my perspective is we need to get people excited about this, frankly, the biggest engineering project the UK has ever tackled. The industry is really craving leadership here, and that might be regional, but it's definitely we need more at central. My view is it starts at school, getting people interested in this as a sector, but we need an urgent study of all the things I've highlighted about how we can pull together all of the training providers across the UK so they can identify and start delivering things that the industry actually needs, not just picking things up off the shelf. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Russell. That's really, really interesting. And obviously, retrofit's one of the biggest challenges I think that we face when it comes to building skills and capacity. So great that we could cover that. Great. So we are running obviously a little bit over time due to the technical issues earlier, but hopefully everyone can stay with us. I'm going to hand over to our next speaker, and we'll still also do a Q&A session for everyone that can stick around for 10 or so minutes after 11. But yeah, next up is Emma Harvey, Programme Director for the Green Finance Institute, who'll be talking to us about the skills that we need to ensure that green finance can deliver on net zero.
Cheers. Thank you, Sophie, and really great to be here today. So, as Sophie mentioned, and as has come up throughout the discussion today, finance is really critical in the decarbonisation journey, and that includes, mobilising more of the existing products that are already out there, but also innovating new financial solutions. And if I actually just take this back a step, we've seen the climate emergency be recognised by many different parties, by scientists, increasingly by governments and by the public. And because of that, we've also seen it creep onto the radar of corporates. And you just have to look at the climate pledges at the moment to understand that corporates are really vested in this. And amongst those are the financial institutions, because they do face huge risks from the climate transition with huge potential for stranded assets and increasing risk on their books. But also there's huge opportunities from the climate transition, huge opportunities to finance and fund the transition of governments, of corporates, and of citizens. And so within financial institutions, we're starting to see growing teams of sustainability colleagues. However, the opportunity to upskill doesn't just lie within those sustainability teams. In fact, there's huge opportunities for every financial professional to develop new skills and to grasp new opportunities. So there's several ways that financial institutions and financial professionals can start to upskill on the climate agenda. And ironically, I apologise, there's a plane about to land near me. So if my audio goes a bit quiet, that is why. So firstly, we can start integrating and educating colleagues on how greening finance impacts their business. So this is how banks can start to manage the risks associated with the climate transition. So greening finance focuses on managing risks, disclosure, taxonomies, how you define green. It was kickstarted by the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And we've also got the Sustainable Finance Disclosure requirements coming in. So it's really on the radars of banks and lenders and investors. And it's really important because, as I mentioned earlier, banks have huge balance sheets where many of the assets could become stranded. So, for instance, if banks are funding fossil fuel providers, those assets over the next few decades are going to decrease significantly in value, and therefore there's huge exposure that banks experience. There's also lots of new regulations around disclosures, as well as banks having to adopt new risk assessment and credit processes. One tangible example that is live at the moment in the mortgage sector is that mortgage lenders are anticipating that government is going to ask them to disclose how much funding they provide to improve the energy efficiency of the homes that they finance, with annual disclosures on what that financing has achieved. So how can colleagues get themselves upskilled on this? Well, there's plenty of resources available via the Bank of England, via the Grantham Institute and beyond. But there's also opportunities for colleagues to start looking at how they can embed climate risk assessment into their own investment decisions, particularly those frontline banking colleagues who are interacting with clients and can actually have conversations with clients about their climate readiness. And having worked in a bank and had these conversations with clients before, it opens up a real wealth of conversation, and actually clients are really, really interested in the low carbon agenda. And then there's also other areas where you can get professional qualifications, such as the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. Now, if we look at the other side of the coin, there's a piece around financing green. So this is how do you move capital towards environmentally positive outcomes. So it's not about looking at what you're already doing and measuring it, but innovating new products, engaging with clients on their net zero journey, and collaborating with organizations, both other financial institutions, but also, as Russ was saying earlier, with constructors and manufacturers and local authorities and central government to try and mobilize capital. And this is where the Green Finance Institute plays most heavily. Now, this is really important because we cannot just look at what we're already doing. There is clearly a market failure by the fact that funds are not moving towards green and environmental outcomes. We need to start accelerating the rate of investment into low carbon activities. And it's a huge investment opportunity. If you look at how much is required to decarbonize buildings alone, the UK Climate Change Committee has estimated that over £250 billion of investment is required to 2050. So huge investment gap, but huge opportunity for lenders. And we're seeing lenders starting to step up and innovate new products. So, for instance, one of the most rapidly growing markets, green finance markets at the moment, is this sustainability-linked loan. So this is a loan where if the corporate borrower achieves particular sustainability targets, the interest rate they pay on that loan reduces. But if they significantly miss those targets, the interest rate increases. So a genuine carrot and stick transaction. And this type of product was initially viewed as profit eroding by the banks because they were offering lower interest rate and getting a lower margin on their transactions. However, in the last 5 years, when this product has been around, it's now the case that if you are not offering sustainability-linked loans to your customers, you are not part of the deal. And so it's become part of the general ask that clients are seeking of their corporate lenders. And that is why we've seen the market grow significantly. Last year, it deployed over $700 billion towards green and ESG activities, and it grew over 300% within just 1 year. So how can colleagues get involved in financing green? Well, there's lots of publications out there that help to monitor the market, so environmental finance, biz green, but more so the traditional finance publications like the FT, like Reuters are providing this information just to help give people inspiration for new products. There's also a really important role for colleague-led initiatives where people within the core business of the bank, so not always the sustainability teams, but actually those who are on the front line who are running the IPOs or doing the investment banking, corporate banking, or designing new mortgages and loans, that can actually try and embed and design and innovate new financial products. And we've seen that really take off across all areas of the finance sector recently. There's an important piece around linking remuneration to green and sustainable activities, which we've seen a number of lenders adopt. And lastly, we need to ensure that there are safe, creative spaces for financial professionals to be allowed to innovate, to be able to take the time to design financial products, which can take 1 to 2 years to design at the best of times. So creating those safe spaces where that innovation can occur and people are not impacted by the fact that they are taking time out of their day job to do this innovation that can ultimately generate returns can be really impactful. And we did something very similar when I was at Barclays, and we were able to launch 11 products within the space of a year because we were able to create that safe space. So just to wrap up, so there's lots of activities for financial professionals to upskill. There is greening finance, so there's opportunities to embed climate activities into your day-to-day risk analysis. And then there is financing green, the opportunity to innovate new financial products. And there's lots of resources, as I mentioned, available through the Bank of England, Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership, the Grantham Institute, as well as the Chartered Bankers Institute's Green Finance Certificate. So I'll leave it there and pass back to Sophie.
Again, really interesting, and really glad that we can be having the conversation around the importance of green finance in our transition to net zero. So ultimately, even if we have the best plan in place, and the best skills in place, if we don't have the ability to fund it, then it's going to be a challenge. So that's brilliant, and thank you to all of our speakers for their brilliant presentations. We've covered a lot of ground, and we have a few questions to cover. If everyone is free to do that. So sticking with the theme of green finance, I have a question for you, Emma, on we've talked about the need within financial markets to start to think about, the types of skills that you need to fund green net zero projects, that a lot of the time are inherently different to other types of projects those kind of institutions or companies might have funded before. But what we also know, and what our program's interested in is that local authorities are likely to play quite an instrumental role in delivering net zero projects, and indeed mobilising funding for them too. So in your view, what is it that can be learned from private finance by local authorities, and to what extent do you think there's a need for collaboration between the two?
So it's a really interesting question, and something that we're obviously working very closely with you on. So the importance of collaboration with local authorities is the fact that 82% of emissions are covered by local authorities. They are not responsible for those 82% of emissions, but they fall within the scope of their constituency boundaries. And also, local authorities have really strong understanding or deep understanding of the decarbonisation pathways within their local area. What houses need to be retrofitted and how, where do charging points need to be, what's the energy and grid resiliency within the area. So they understand very deeply what needs to be undertaken. And lastly, they also have very strong connections in with their local citizens, which is incredibly important because a lot of the decarbonisation activities that happen these days require citizens, homeowners, drivers to make a decision to go greener. So linking finance with local authorities can act as a critical enabler for supporting decarbonisation. So important role for sort of financing to move into local authorities. But there's also a really important role that local authorities themselves can play in deploying capital. For instance, the Green Finance Institute is running a campaign with Abundance Investments focused on local climate bonds, which is a way for local authorities to raise capital, and the investors are local citizens. It's crowdfunding for local authorities. And we've found that local climate bonds can have really important impacts. They've been invested into solar parks and recycling and charging points, but they have really strong citizen engagement levels as well, which can be highly beneficial in getting people on the net zero journey. So local authorities, they can be really important deployers of capital, but also enablers of finance to move into an area.
Obviously, yeah, an area of interest for both of us, and hoping we can say more about the work that we've been working on around that area in the next couple of months. So I want to come to Russell for the next question. We've talked about mobilising funding and mobilising skills in the funding sector to support our transition to net zero. But Russell, you mentioned something earlier, which I thought was really interesting, about how, in order to mobilise demand and reassure citizens, households that investing in retrofit measures, energy efficiency measures is worthwhile, we need to invest in people skills, essentially, as well as those technical skills needed for installation. That's also required. So I wondered what type of cross-sector collaboration you think is needed there, and whether you have seen that in practice, if there's any examples where you've seen that in practice in the work that you've done across Oxford and London.
Oh, I really wish I had a good answer for this. All we've ever really done, because nothing has been there, is get on with it. And it might well be that we've got some good examples of how we've done it, but the heart of every one of our schemes is somebody that just commits their life to it for a year to make it work. And that's pretty tough for everybody concerned, okay? We have consulted with some sort of customer service specialists before, but we've never had the budget for it. These guys are not cheap. What we have done, I think that's very important though, we have worked with the financial sector's examples of how to deal with vulnerable customers. And we've devised our own training course for our members on how to deal with vulnerable people when you are discussing with them, big changes to their home. They might have to put some of their money into it. We've got other money we can bring on the whole, especially for the London programs. That's a really, really interesting area. And I think one particular thing we don't necessarily realise is that a vulnerable person is probably somebody that's never had a builder in their home before. They might have their life together in many ways, but vulnerability is about being exposed and being unaware of what might be coming as well. So somebody that's vulnerable could be somebody that has just never had any disruption in their house before, and they might freak out, and you need to be able to handle that situation. So those kind of things, there's going to be lots of examples just like that will emerge as we do more retrofit. But that is a key one, and we've had to work that out for ourselves with some assistance from the finance sector.
Thanks, Russell. I guess, you know, learning what's still needed to further down the line is just as important as being able to get on and deliver it. So it sounds like you've learned some really important lessons, and great that we could share that and draw attention to where we need to focus our attention in the future. So one thing that we talked about just now was the need for local authorities and the private sector to work together. But one thing that we've learned on the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme, and one thing that we have reported in our Accelerating Net Zero report, which I will post a link to later, it does focus on the support that local authorities themselves need in developing their own internal skills and capacity, especially around finance. So Rosanna, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what the research that Energy Rev has been doing in that area is telling us about what's needed.
About the local authorities themselves.
Yes.
Yes, so we have been talking with representatives of local authorities in all three case studies, but also looking into understanding what are the skills needs within the local authorities themselves. And local authorities are surprisingly not very different from all the other sectors, because actually, as I said, when we talk about upskilling, and all the colleagues mentioned the same thing, it's not just upskilling in one thing, it's upskilling across everything that happens within the system. And in this case, with local authorities, we have a clear need for upskilling the understanding of how to finance renewable projects. Because what we hear is a lot of projects which are put forward to the internal local authority projects are rejected by their own finance teams, because the repayment project is so long they don't want to commit, because it's considered too high of a risk to commit for 20 years, 25 years. But that's what you need to do for things which are renewable based, right? So they have repayment times for much longer than the usual 5 years or something like this. The second aspect is also mentioned, the procurement processes. How do you buy in such a way that you are supporting the transition itself? And in many cases, we actually, for example, with respect to retrofitting, we want to have within the local authorities that we've spoken, they want to have certified people to deliver the local retrofit activities for themselves, for the local authorities themselves. But those certifications are not always available. So how do you actually acquire the service when the certification is not available is a challenge. So we have started in Bristol with a community, Bristol Energy Network. We've started a project called Future Proof, which is supporting the accreditation of retrofit activities, and then the local providers, including the local authorities, can refer to those certified activities. But also I want to mention the other side of a power of local authority is in land ownership, right? So they have so much land that they can direct in one way or another. And if a local authority is committed to supporting renewable activities, they can do a lot of good. For example, in Bristol, one of the biggest on land wind turbine is being built in collaboration with local authority, who has donated the land to the community, deprived community, who is building the turbine with the intention of selling the energy back to their own people who live in that area, local area, to improve the standard of living as well as to improve the greenness. And the other things like local building regulations, by saying that you have to have a percentage of energy in any new build to be generated from renewable sources, local authorities are really driving the change. So they have a lot of power, and they have a lot of resource control as well. But in many cases, they need to understand themselves how to work with for example, local communities, how can you work with the communities to pass that land to them, to trust that they're going to do something, to support that kind of bottom-up activity, how to build up these networks of sustainable procurement resources and providers. So yes, a lot to do and a lot that they can do as well.
Yeah, huge potential there, and the that example in Bristol is a really good demonstration of how efforts at the grassroots can really help to build and scale big opportunities. So I want to zoom out for a minute and ask a question, Rosanna, about your research in terms of obviously you've been looking at smart local energy systems as a new sector that's emerging. How does your approach to understanding the skills that are required for smart local energy systems to scale, how does that differ to the approach that might be taken for other more traditional and established industries like construction, for example?
So the challenge that we had with undertaking this particular piece of research is, as you said, that the sector doesn't exist. So there is no predefined metrics of saying that this kind of input in this type of activity is going to generate this number of jobs within this time period. So that's what we normally have for our traditional sectors, where we can actually look at inputs and outputs and expected changes within that particular set industry, because the numbers have been collected and collated for a number of years. Because there isn't anything which is a smart local energy system as a sector, we don't have that kind of sectoral data. So we have taken, as I said, a case study-based approach, and we have looked at what is happening within each of the projects. ISO, which is running about 3 years now, Reflect, which is running about 3 years now, but also what's happening at the city scale in Bristol, where things have been happening for much longer and similar projects have been happening and experience have been collected throughout the last 10-15 years. So the difference, as I say, critically, is that there is no numbers to rely on. So we've taken this case study-based approach, and with the notion of emerging sector of smart local energy systems, actually, it is a little bit misleading in a sense that the digital services are an emerging kind of a sector, and they are going to exist at cross-section of all the other things, including governance, including transport, energy supply. Those things are the new kind of emerging type of services, but they are going to be integrating, as I say, a lot of traditional sectors into them. And while we started thinking that we are going to be talking about smart local energy sector, what we're really coming back to understanding is that's not a separate sector. That's something which requires a systemic transition, a transition across all the other sectors for something like those smart local digital services to be functioning. So you need to have your transport transitioned, digitized, connected. You need to have your buildings retrofitted with the building management system data collected and integrated. Digital services available for moving consumption in the houses through the linked devices to off-peak times. So all those things are distributed across homes, across sectors, and then integrating them through optimization kind of a service is where the really new services are emerging, but they can't go forward without all the other things moving alongside. So it's a balanced supply and demand things happening here, that you need to be providing the data, providing the capacity for people to install and to integrate those new appliances, new businesses to be emerging to deliver those kind of new services based on that. And yeah, so I wouldn't say it's a sector, I would say it's a system, and it's systems-wide transition that is necessary.
Yes, so right, thank you. That's really a reflection of the work that we've still got to do, and but the potential for change that we can achieve in really considering what's required to transition to net zero and what we need in place. I'm sorry, I think we are out of time. But really appreciate everyone's contributions today. It's been a really interesting discussion, and really appreciate everyone's time. For those of you who are listening or watching, we will make the recording of the event available online, so please do like and share widely. And we hope that you'll continue to follow the work that our speakers are doing, and the work that the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme is also doing. So I will wrap up there and say a last thank you to everyone for contributing today.